You know, I was in a marital counseling once, and I actually heard a woman say this. She said, we were talking, they were having some problems, and they wanted to talk about it, and she actually told me, well, if he really loved me, he'd have married somebody else. Wow.
There's a certain logic to that.
I guess. I love it too when the wife comes in. Usually it's the wife. The husband, she'll come, let's face it, guys, you're cowards. She'll never come in. Unless your wife is dragging you gagged and bound. But the wife usually comes in and she fusses, and I ask her, well, what exactly is wrong? What do you think is wrong with your husband? Number one answer, everything. Wow, you're that bad, huh? Come on, guys, everything? Today our divorce rate is just disgraceful. 68 to 70% lately. 68 to 70%, according to the Gallup polls of last year. And the Christian is no different. Christian rates are just as high. It's the age-old expression, marriages are made in heaven, right? But they're lived out in New Jersey. And the reality of the marriage, sometimes women are more involved, in love with the concept of marriage than the guy they're marrying. And I would say that's also true for men as well. So we go into this thing thinking, oh, everything's wonderful, love is grand. And then when the rubber hits the road, sometimes love's not so grand. You had your own life, your own decisions, your own agenda. You were answerable to nobody. And then suddenly she came into your kingdom. And as glorious as it was at first, it's not so glorious any longer. And the woman is thinking the same thing. I used to be the most gentle, kind, wonderful, loving person. And then he came. And so what do you do about all this? We always complain. We have marital counselors out the wazoo. We got 1 billion self-help books out there promising you that you can develop the perfect relationship. How many of you have the perfect relationship other than me? I'm not stupid. There's always a few bumps along the way. And people will sit here, I've been married 37, 57, 67, 87 years. Well, I'll pray for your husband. How do we find the perfect relationship? Well, today, I think we need, first and foremost, as Jesus says, the Pharisees came and they were testing him. And they were asking him, what do you say about divorce? Not a common question, very common practice. Probably as bad in those days as it is now. But they didn't give a hoot and a holler about divorce or relationship or anything. They just wanted to catch Jesus in a position to where they could criticize and hopefully condemn him. So Jesus turned it around and said, well, what does your law say? What does it say? What did Moses command you? He was the guy that God gave his law to, right? What does Moses say about this thing, divorce? And they said, well, Moses said it's okay. We can write a certificate of divorce and out the door. And that's about what it was in those day and age. All the guy had to do was get 2 others to agree with him, write a certificate, and the woman was out with no property, no means, no money, no nothing. That simple. Well, that's kind of a very unloving thing to do, to throw someone on the street. So they were testing Jesus. What does your own law say? And they said, well, Moses gave us the right to do it. He said it's okay. And Jesus answers them saying, you know why? It's because of the hardness of your heart, the sin, the coldness, the wickedness inside of you, that this goes on. It was never intended by God. In the beginning, the scriptures say that a man shall leave his mother and father, and a woman shall leave her home, And they shall go forth and seek out one another. And when they find, they shall cleave thereunto one another. And I shall bless them, and they shall become one in my sight. And all that they do, I will establish their home forever in peace. And the work of their hands shall be fruitful. And they shall multiply and have many. And on it goes. This was God's intent. It was no boot her out the door when she becomes inconvenient or disagrees or whatever. It's because of your cold, wicked, dead hearts. It's because you've moved out of the sight of God. You're no longer one in God's sight because He sure would not permit this. Jesus answered, for this very reason, God said, I shall make them both male and female, and a man shall leave his father and mother, and the two shall seek and find and become one in my sight. Consequently, they are no longer two, but they are now one. What therefore God hath joined, let no man separate. What do you feel about that passage? Well, Tom, divorce isn't that bad. Well, obviously, we're up to 70%. We're well on our way. You know what one of the biggest crises of 2018 is? In America, in the United States of America? Nobody's getting married anymore. They're just hanging out. They're just living together. And this is concerning. It's concerning to the marriage people and the wedding people and the dressmakers and all the people that do weddings. They're losing billions of dollars of industry every year because this Generation X, Y, Z, whatever they call them, is saying, well, I don't got to get married. We'll just live together. Wow, gee, isn't that amazing? I'll bet if you go down to the Ford dealership and say, I don't want to buy it, I just want to drive it around for a while. They'll say, sure, no problem. Keep it as long as you want. When you're tired of it, bring it back. In fact, just throw it on the side of the road. We'll come get it. It is harder and more designed and demanding to buy a car than it is to take a wife or a husband. It is because the hardness of your heart, you've forgotten all about what it means to become one in my sight. See, I think we need new goals. So many times young couples come to me, and I'm not making this up, folks. Gary will back this up. He actually was there and heard a couple times. They come to me and they say, Tom, we want you to do our wedding. Can you do it? But just take all the God stuff out of it. You know, I'm a minister. You do understand that. My life, you know what my life is, Shirley? God stuff. Take all the God stuff out. Well, why don't you ask your bus driver to marry you then? Your plumber. You know, call an electrician. Never am I more offended, by the way, if someone asks me that. We want to come to the church. We want to sit in our aisle. We want to pray down here. We want to be in the church, but take all the God stuff out of it. And yet that's what I deal with. Compassionately, kindly, with patience and peace. Then I throw them out the door. No, I don't. And the two shall become one in my sight, says the Lord. I think there's your clue. The first thing we got to do to have a healthy marriage or a strong relationship is to remember who's at the command of this ship. We must become one in God's sight. You know, when a man and woman come here and they stand before the altar and they become one in God's sight, they're not promising just each other their love, they're promising God. The man is saying, I will, my Lord, in your witness, by your desire. I will love her with my whole heart all my life, better or worse, sickness and health, through football and baseball seasons, everything. I will love her. But see, you're making that promise not to her, but to the Lord. I'm making the contract with you, Lord. And if I mess it up, then you can clobber me. Same thing with the wife. I promise to love you no matter what, you Neanderthal. But see, she's making her promise to God first and foremost. We are becoming one in God's sight. We are signing the deal, each one, two people signing the deal with one God. So if you need to be afraid, don't be afraid of your wife. Don't be afraid of your husband. Be afraid of the Lord. He's the one you're making the deal with. Becoming one in God's sight. You know, we always have arguments. Everybody does. The best marriage in the world has headaches, heartaches, and hurts. It's going to happen. Why? Well, because we're human people with senses and feelings. I mean, Carol and I have had our fights, but the thing was, I was more afraid to run away from her because of God, and she could have left me 1,000,000 times. She married a real monkey, you know that, don't you? But she was more afraid of aggravating God. And I think, I don't know, you have to ask her, but I think one of the strengths of our relationship, lo, these 40 years, has been just that. God first. Christocentric. It's not just, Carol, I'm hurting any longer. It's the Lord. And forget about me being a minister. Let's pretend for a minute I'm a school teacher or something. Do I really want to aggravate God? You know how mad a bank gets if you break a contract with them? They get real upset. They come get your car. They throw you out of your house. They don't care about your situation or your job or the loss thereof. You break a contract with them, they get mad. Well, do we think it's okay to say, God, yeah, I didn't really mean it. What does your law say, says Moses, or says Jesus to the priest? Well, Moses said it's okay. No, it's not always okay. Maybe in the case of physical abuse, separation is in order. Maybe in the case of addictions. But it's not always okay just to say, I'm tired of this and I'm leaving. We have to become one in God's sight. That's what he says. Secondly, we need to be committed to our spouse. Now, if I were to ask each one of you, are you committed to your spouse? What would you say? You'd say, sure. Okay. And everything is good. You know how many of us are committed to our spouse on the wedding day? All of us. You know how many are committed to our spouse on the birth of our first child? Most of us. You know how many of us are committed to our spouse when those kids are teenagers? Fewer of us. You know how many are committed to our spouse when there's no money, the house is a wreck, our kids have gone bad, and he's laying around playing video games? None of us. Situations change. Life changes every day. People change. I read that silly thing before about women marry men expecting them to change. They never do. Well, there's some truth there. In North Carolina, we were up there for my son's wedding, and we were looking at this little river and this nice little peaceful stream, and it comes down. Oh, it's beautiful, picturesque, Norman Rockwell kind of thing. And then another one's coming down. Well, where they join together, it gets pretty rough. And it's torn up and it's white water. It's great for the residents because they like that rafting thing, you know, when they go down in the big rubber boat. The white water is great. That's kind of like relationships. You're a single man and your life's great. You're just kind of drifting along like a jellyfish, life without a brain. That's most men. Here's a woman over here. They're at peace and they're restful. If they want to, spend an hour on their hair, they do. If they want to spend an hour on their nails, they do. If they want to spend the rest of their life on their hair and nails. I like women when they say, I'm going to go get my hair done. Yeah. It's never done. You're just going to get it worked on some more. Anyway, and then for some reason, they fall in love and they're married. And for the first couple of feet, it's okay. But then what happens? White water. How many of us have white water relationships? Come on, don't lie. We've all had white water relationships. And you know what? You're hogging my rubber boat. Get out. But if you're committed to your spouse, if you're saying, as tough as these younger years are when we have no money and a old beat up car and we're just trying to get our lives and our businesses going, or we're in school and we got debt up to our eyeballs, if we just say, someday we'll get beyond this. Someday we'll be old and frail and falling apart. And we'll need each other to put those parts back on. There's a lot of truth in that. Someday those two rivers that are torrent now will begin to smooth out. They'll be together, but it'll get a little smoother, a little easier, a little quieter. And we call these the golden years. Another term we've never defined. What are the golden years? Well, I'll tell you what they are. It's to be shining bright in the light of God's love as one. I told the Sunday school class, I said, I don't believe in equal rights in marriage. There's no such thing. It's certainly not in God's kingdom. No such thing as equal rights, because if you have equal rights, that means you're focusing on you. Well, I'm doing all the work around here. Well, I'm doing all the dishes. Well, I'm doing all the laundry. Well, I'm making all the money. I'm. It's all about me. That's equal rights. See, when you focus on equal rights, you're really focusing on yourself. According to God, it's completing rights. Jesus said, you want to be the greatest, even in a marriage? Be the servant of all. You want to be the first, even in marriage? Be the last. Give a hoot and a holler and a concern about everybody else other than yourself. Give it a try. Now, if a guy and a woman come together and they're doing the same thing, putting themselves last, making themselves service, and learning to literally cherish their spouse more than themselves, what kind of hellish relationship is that? I'm being flip here. That would be grand, wouldn't it? That would be loving, wouldn't it? And if you did that every day of your life, never compromising, totally committed to your spouse every day of your life, wow, 50, 60 years of having to live with her, caring for me, loving me, taking care of my every concern. How could God do that to me? See what I'm saying? Today, men and women, boys and girls, really, the young people, they don't understand what it means to become one in God's sight. It's not about equal rights. It's about completing rights. There's things my wife can do that I will never be able to do. There are things that I can help her do that she'll never be able to do. But together we do great. And we do them in faithfulness, not just to each other. That's secondary. We do it in faithfulness to the God who said, I'm going to put you two together. I think it's a good mix. Then secondly, Tom, you will be the object of Carol's whole love. Carol, you will be the object of Tom's whole love. That's secondary, committing to our spouses. Yeah, the river gets a little rough occasionally. Just enjoy the ride. Eventually it will smooth out. Eventually it will be again at peace, and it will reflect the love and the promise and the faithfulness which you made in the first place. Now that's a gift you can't put a price on. That's a wedding gift you'll never be able to afford unless you invest your life in making it. Lastly, then, we need to realize and set our eyes on the end goal. You know, we always like the passages about fixing our eyes on the author and the finisher of our faith. The problem is all the people that fix their eyes on their author of their faith are shouting and shouting, "Yay, Jesus!" But by, a few years after life beats them up pretty well, they're not in church, they're not in Bible study, they're not having prayers anymore. What happened to the "Yay, Jesus"? Author and finisher of our faith, to run the race set before us, to lay aside the burdens and encumbrances, and to complete the goal, to win the race, keeping our eyes focused on the author and finisher of our race. Well, the same thing is true of marriage. You don't bail. I like this little piece a wife wrote. He didn't like my casserole, and he didn't like my cake. My biscuits were too hard, not like his mother used to make. I didn't perk the coffee right. He didn't like my stew. I didn't mend his socks the way his mother used to do. I pondered for an answer. I was looking for a clue. Then I turned around and smacked him just like his mother used to do. We got to remember the goal, people, the author and the finisher of our life. We want to walk into heaven in the same glory and the same love and the same joy as we walked into the church to say, "Lord, I does." Yes, there's going to be problems. Yes, there's going to be heartaches. Whitewater, if you like to call it that. Whitewater marriages. Carol and I have fights. Usually she comes to her senses and comes back crawling on her hands and knees. Crawling on her hands and knees, looks under and says, "Tom, come out from under that bed, you coward, and fight like a man." I'm going to pay for that one. There will be those days. That's what makes every day precious, so sometimes. George Carnegie said, "You can learn so much from a mistake or a bad example, much more than an easy success." Oh, easy successes are enjoyed, aren't they? Well, that was easy. But how much more do you learn when you've got to assess and adapt and overcome, staying true to the cause all the way, even if it takes a lot out of you? When you get done, it's like a man who just put his own lawnmower together. How about a man who's been the good husband, the faithful spouse, and the true believer of his God? On the plane, Caroline went to California this week. She had business. I went with her for a couple of days. I was luggage. But we went out there, and on the way out there, I watched a movie. I don't know if you all seen it. If you have not, I would recommend you see it, because it speaks of this author and finisher kind of thing. The name of the movie is I Can Only Imagine. Have any of you seen that? Whoa. Whoa. I sat there and I said, "What is this? Oh, Christian movie, blah, blah, blah." I said, "Yeah, right. I'll watch it." When it was done, whoa. It's a powerful movie. He was a whitewater life. I guarantee it was a whitewater life for him. And yet somewhere, a small child with the beginning, the author of his faith in Christ to the end. Whoa. That's what the song's all about that he wrote. I can only imagine walking into the gates of heaven and seeing Jesus face to face. What am I going to do? Will I shout? Will I be still? Will I dance? Will I be able to do anything? Can you imagine? Think for a moment. When God comes up, Jesus Christ meets you, and you are all so afraid, and you know your life has been difficult, and He opens the gates of heaven, He comes out, and He wraps His arm around you and just hugs you, squeezes the stuffing out of you, and says, "Well done, my child." Can you imagine that? Happens every day if you and your spouse are one in God's sight. Happens every day. Divorce rate 70%. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Tell me, what does your law say? Well, Moses said it was okay. Well, Moses is an idiot. Let me tell you what God says. The greatest prize you will ever win is that woman you're about to parade down to the altar of God. The greatest joy you will ever know is that man that you're standing in front of in a rented suit. And the greatest peace you will ever rest in is when you rest in me and become one in the sight of God. Song of Solomon can teach you that. Jesus reiterates it in the gospel. God said it in the very first few chapters of Genesis. I think it's kind of the way He prefers. Go and be one in His sight with your spouse, with your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. Focus on God, commit to your spouse, and weather the white water. And you'll do just fine. The author and finisher of your faith and your relationship. Let us pray. Father, I thank You for this study in Song of Solomon. It's been a very strong and good study for 8 weeks. And I thank You for Your Son, Jesus Christ, who told us that all we do can be made better if we stop listening to man and start listening to the Lord. So, Father, let us, in all that we do, become one in Your sight. And truly, truly let no one tear us under. In Jesus our Christ, we pray and we hope and we drive to become one always in Your sight. Amen. That study in Psalm